Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to the Center for Critical Qualitative Health Research public seminar series. Delighted to have you with us today. A few housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, my name is Blake Poland. I've had the pleasure of being a CQ fellow for a number of years now, and really delighted to be facilitating today's discussion and session. The CQ Public Seminar Series is a place where leading researchers and scholars are invited to share their groundbreaking work on theory-informed qualitative health research methodology. And we're delighted to have Dr. Alan Martino today speaking on Crip magic, methodology, mentorship, and maddening academia. Really excited about this talk. And with us also, we have Dr. Jennifer Poole from Toronto Metropolitan University to introduce Alan. A few housekeeping things in terms of format. Today, the session is being recorded, so please keep that in mind. We'll do a few introductions. I'll introduce Jen, and then she will introduce Alan, and then we'll hear from Alan for 45 to 50 minutes approximately, and then we'll open it up for discussion and dialogue, question and answer. The chat is enabled for today, so please make use of that as a space to share your thoughts and your questions. We will do our best to monitor that during the time. Please ensure that you're muted, as we find the occasional barking dog and crunching lunch can be a little disruptive to everyone else's enjoyment of the session. And feel free to mute your cameras as well so that folks moving around and so on don't distract us. But do feel free to turn your cameras back on when Alan's talk concludes and we open it up for discussion. And so you can we'll remind you again, but you can put your questions in the chat or raise your hand with the little appropriate button, which we all learned during COVID, to ask your question live. And I think that's it for the logistics. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jennifer Poole. Jen, by her own accounts, is a white settler from England and maddened community peer supporter. In addition to being a CQ fellow for quite a while now, she's also an associate professor in social work at Toronto Metropolitan University, where her teaching, learning, and research is focused on saneisms, madness, grief, death, and interrupting colonialism in pedagogy and methodology. She supports learners and students at multiple universities, is a co-lead editor for the International Mad Studies Journal, and has deep experience in multiple ways of making and sharing knowledge. She is all about, last but not least, good chocolate and supporting the next generation of mad scholars. And I will post in the chat in a moment a link to Jennifer's work. And we're really delighted that Jen can introduce Alan today because they're in a similar fields and know each other's work, and much more appropriate that the introduction comes from her. So Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Blake. Hello, everyone. Today, I'm on Treaty 13 territory. As you know, this is also the Dish with One Spoon, covered by that particular wampum. This is Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee land. And I am a white woman. My pronouns are she, her. I have brown hair. I've got round glasses. I'm wearing pink today because that's the energy that I woke up with, excited and spring-like. I am so happy to be doing this today. So happy to be welcoming Alan and saying a few words of introduction. As you may have read, Dr. Martino is assistant professor in the Community Rehabilitation and Disability Studies program, the Department of Community Health Sciences at the University of Calgary. His main interests are critical disability studies and gender and sexualities, qualitative and community-based research, particularly using participatory and inclusive research methodologies. His work has been published in multiple journals, and I encourage you to read them all, paying special attention to the wonderful titles that Alan comes up with. And those journals are Disability Studies Quarterly, the Canadian Disability Studies Journal, Culture, Health, and Sexuality, as well as many edited volumes on disability and or sexualities. And in his spare time, Alan is also the lead of the Disability and Sexuality Lab. And I also want to say a little bit more about Alan. If you'll just let me speak a little bit longer. I've admired your work, Dr. Martino, for a long time. I also admire the way you do your work, the energy you bring to it, the insights, the collaborations, the community making, and your signature approach to disability and madness. I love your languaging of madness, such as mental state diversity, the rooting in positionality, history, ancestors, and family, the multiple routes to expression and meaning making, and the elevation of care for everyone who comes to make meaning with you and because of you. The students you mentor adore you. I know because I've met them. And I also think you're only getting started with so many growth spurts to come. In short, I think CQ is incredibly fortunate that you've joined this group, and everyone here is fortunate to learn from and with you. I'm so glad that you agreed to do this talk. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to you. Thank you, Alan.
Wow, I don't even know what to say after that. So thank you so much. It really is so touching. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. And also, can I just say what an honor to be introduced by this amazing colleague, Jennifer Poole, whose work I really admire, who has been really a role model for me in terms of thinking about med studies, thinking about my own lived experiences. I'm your number one fan. So thank you so much for being here and for supporting and pushing me in writing this paper today. I really, really appreciate it. For accessibility, my visual description is I'm a bald brown man with a mustache and wearing dark round frame glasses. I'm wearing a blue shirt with white dots. I'd also like to note that the University of Calgary is located in the heart of Southern Alberta, which we both acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of people of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Santinele First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. I also would like to invite folks to use their space in any way that makes the most sense to their bodies and minds. Feel free to stand up, sit down, move around, lay down, play with your favorite non-human animal companion that you have around you. I'm sure my cat will make an appearance at some point. In this presentation, I want to address some of the profound silence that has historically shrouded the narratives of those who have been labeled as mad and disabled in our society. It's a reflection of a dominant discourse where the voices and experiences of mad and disabled people are either dismissed or pathologized. Today, I hope to challenge some of these assumptions as I discuss the ethics of research participation, advocating for a paradigm shift from overprotectionism to empowerment, especially for people with disabilities and mad people. This discussion is a call to embrace what I would call Crip magic in qualitative research, a transformative approach that recognizes the unique insights and strengths arising from the lived experiences of those often sidelined by conventional methodologies. Okay, and if I were to picture Mariah Carey doing her accessibility statement, this is what it would look like. This is how she feels right at home at comfort. And you see lots of Mariah Carey GIFs in this presentation, so be warned. In terms of my positionality statement, I'm a queer sociologist of color and first generation actually person in my family, trying to navigate the world of academia, thankfully with the support of kind mentors. I live with invisible disabilities myself, including mental health experiences. And this self-identification is for me a political and personal acknowledgement that challenges the stigma and stereotypes associated with madness. Of course, I did not always feel in the position to be this open. I'm now one of the lucky tenure-track faculty members with some level of job stability. My attitude towards academia now is basically, to be very honest, take me or leave me. In my prior experiences teaching med studies courses, undergraduate students have often been surprised with my openness. My lived experience of madness is not a, in quote, liability, as some institutions would be concerned about, but a form of expertise. My own lived experience with madness informs my perspective, empathy, and understanding of the nuances and complexities of mental state diversity. For this session, I would like to put forward a humble proposal. And just a warning, this is a highly experimental paper in many ways, but it's an opportunity to reimagine how and why we do qualitative research. I will refer to this as the transformative potential of Crip magic. Please don't worry if you're not familiar with the concept yet. I grew up in Brazil in a household that practiced candomblé. Candomblé is an Afro-Brazilian religious tradition that originated in Brazil, primarily among enslaved African people who were violently brought from West Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. It has its roots in Yoruba, Fon, Bantu beliefs from different regions of Africa. In this religion, there is a belief that deities or orishas can communicate directly with humans, sometimes through images, sometimes through their voices. We consider a special gift to be able to see or hear the sacred deities. My own brother is, in fact, one of those lucky people who can hear those voices and occasionally even see the deities. Interestingly, from time to time, while living outside of Brazil, I've been told by people that I should consider taking my sibling to a psychiatrist. The hearing voices cannot be, in quotes, normal, nor desirable, nor healthy. For some, my brother would be labeled as being insane or mad. The voices he hears, actually, are very positive, though. They send out positive messages and pieces of advice to help us mere mortals. To me, as a med studies scholar, this background has allowed me to reflect on the existing hierarchies of reality and experience, the labeling process of madness, and the quick desire to pathologize and medicalize multiple aspects of our social life. As a critical qualitative research scholar, this family experience also makes me consider the implications of different cultural understandings of mental health. It underscores the importance of recognizing and valuing diverse perspectives on what constitutes normalcy and mental well-being and mental health states. It also highlights the potential dangers and limitations of a one-size-fits-all approach to mental health and the ways in which we do qualitative research. A quick note about terminology that I'll be using in this presentation. The term Crip has been reclaimed by some disabled people. The reclamation of the term Crip is an example of a marginalized social group taking control of a word that has once been used historically in a pejorative and demeaning manner. In this context, Crip originates from the word cripple, which was used to describe people with disabilities in a way that emphasized limitation or lack of ability. The reclamation process is a form of empowerment and an assertion of pride and identity. By embracing the term, the individuals and communities are signaling a refusal to be defined by the negative connotations historically associated with disability and madness. It represents a conscious effort to subvert and challenge the social stigma and discrimination that can be associated with disability. The term MAD within med studies has gone a similar process of reclamation. Historically, MAD has also been used to describe individuals with experiences and behaviors that apparently have been seen as deviating from societal norms of mental health, often carrying negative connotations. Historically, the narratives concerning individuals labeled as mad have been predominantly dictated by those in positions of authority, often excluding the actual voices and experiences of mad people themselves. This oversight is largely rooted in a pervasive belief that those deemed mad lack the so-called logical reasoning or the ability to form meaningful relationships. The authority to define what constitutes madness, along with determining the appropriate societal and professional responses to it, has traditionally been in the hands of professionals such as psychiatrists, psychologists, educators, clergy, counselors. Michel Foucault's seminal work in 1967 provides a critical perspective on this issue. He states, "The constitution of madness as a mental illness thrusts into oblivion all those stammered imperfect words without fixed syntax in which the exchange between madness and reason was made. The language of psychiatry, which is a monologue of reason about madness, has been established only on the basis of that silence." Foucault's observation suggests that the field of psychiatry has not only defined madness as a mental illness, but has also positioned it in direct opposition to something that society values, rationality. This dichotomy leads to a situation where the perspectives of mad people are either completely ignored or solely interpreted as a symptom of our own madness, therefore reinforcing our marginalization. For those of us living under these labels, history has rendered us voiceless in many ways, operating under the assumption their contributions lack sense, rationality, importance, relevance. Our perspectives have been deemed disconnected from a supposed shared reality and stripped of social relevance. As I've articulated with my colleague Enfred Shermans in a previous publication, the right to say yes to research participation is equally as important as participants' and collaborators' right to say no to research. Yet, over and over again, myself and my colleagues in disability studies have faced multiple challenges getting projects with disabled and mad people approved by ethics review boards. We have spent countless hours educating board members, pushing back against ableist, sanist comments and assumptions. In my work, I've encountered, for example, an ethics review board member who asked me, quote, "Are they, disabled people, gonna give you any good data? Why don't you just talk to the parents and support workers instead?" End quote. Here, we see an assumption that disabled people are not credible. They're not knowers. They cannot articulate their experiences in non-disabled traditional ways. Instead, I was highly advised that I should talk to family members, direct care workers. In my work as a faculty member, I've also mentored med students who had their ability to do qualitative research questioned on the basis that supposedly they would not be able to handle, listen to other people's experiences, or that they would simply not be the most well-equipped to do this type of research. Expanding on this, it becomes evident that traditional ethics review boards often operate under certain ideas about knowledge and knowledge creation, which we need to challenge. However, these challenges present an opportunity for transformative change. Instead of being discouraged, researchers should be encouraged to adopt a more nuanced and empathetic approach when working with people facing mental health experiences. This involves, for example, moving beyond mere compliance with ethical guidelines to a deeper understanding of the lived experience of mad and disabled individuals. It's about sensitivity to stigma, awareness of the potential re-traumatization of folks that we talk to. An adaptation of research methodologies should be more inclusive, respectful, as a crucial steps in the right direction. Moreover, researchers should innovate in the ways we communicate research, engage with supported decision-making, ensure that the agency of people's lived experiences is central to the research process. This should involve using alternative communication strategies, providing various forms of support to enable decision-making, and consistently prioritizing the autonomy of participants, their right to say yes as well. By doing so, researchers can create an environment where the right to say yes is not only respected, but encouraged. Disabled people and mad people are in excellent position to identify and address these concerns in research context. In essence, I would say, it's about flipping the script in research ethics. It entails a fundamental shift from overprotectionism to empowerment. Yes, empowerment rather than disempowerment. It requires a commitment to understanding and valuing diverse perspectives, ensuring that research practices do not silence or marginalize, but rather amplify, respect the voices of participants, both as research subjects, but also as co-researchers, most importantly, especially those from more traditionally underrepresented groups. I particularly love this GIF. It just gives me like a spring vibe. For me, the term crip is particularly powerful when taken as a verb, as a form of practice, one that aims to disrupt normative understandings of bodies and minds and social practices. In the context of qualitative research, crip magic refers to the unique and transformative power that disabled and mad people bring to the research process. This concept embraces the lived experiences and knowledge of disabled people, challenging traditional notions of competency and competence in academia. It's instead about leveraging the creative and often unorthodox perspectives that arise from navigating a world that is not designed for us in the first place. Crip Magic enriches qualitative research by infusing it with deeper insights into resilience, adaptability, and the multifaceted nature of human experience. It calls for methodologies that are not merely inclusive by design, but are fundamentally reimagined to capture the nuanced realities of disabled and mad lives, ensuring their voices are not just heard, but are actually instrumental in shaping research design and outcomes. This term celebrates the alchemy that occurs when marginalized voices take center stage, catalyzing a more equitable, comprehensive understanding of our social world. The magic of this approach lies in its transformative approach. It pushes researchers to go beyond mere accommodation, urging us to see disability and madness as sources of methodological strength and reimagining. Whether it's through the subtleties of communication that surpass verbal communication and language, the richness of sensory experiences that inform perception, or in the ingenuity that comes with navigating a world that is not built for us, but that still we find ways to navigate it and thrive. Furthermore, Crip Magic challenges researchers to confront and dismantle the systemic barriers that have excluded these voices. It demands ethical reflexivity, recognizing the power dynamics at play, one that seeks to establish research as a collaborative act, where participants or co-researchers are co-creators, not simply subjects, or even worse, objects. By doing so, it fosters a research environment where dignity, respect, agency are paramount. Furthermore, Crip Magic adopts an intersectional lens. It's about exploring the interplay of disability and madness with other identity facets, like race, gender, sexuality, social class. As a side note, I've been asked by ethics review boards before why I was asking participants about their race, gender, and sexuality. Wasn't disability labeled enough, I was asked. Well, no. We need a more comprehensive understanding of individuals' multifaceted experiences. So Crip Magic is not just an approach, but I would hope a movement within qualitative research, advocating for a scholarship that is as diverse as the society seeks to understand. It's about aligning us with the principles of social justice, promoting a vision of research that is not only inclusive, but emancipatory. It's that alchemy that turns marginalization into empowerment, transforming disabled research and participant into architects of a more inclusive future. This method, which I've come to call narrative alchemy, just to play with the magic language. I was into a mode of magic and witching hour. It represents a dynamic storytelling process interwoven with deep reflection. It transcends the mere act of data collection to become a transformative conduit of genuine human connection. This method is collaborative. Stories are not simply told, they're forged in the shared fires of interaction and introspection. At its core, narrative alchemy is about creating a participatory space where individual stories is honored as a vital source of knowledge. Participants are invited to share their experiences in settings that respects and values their voices, not just for the sake of contribution to research, but for the recognition that their values, their narratives are valuable. It recognizes that stories and storytelling can occur outside of normative order of events, can happen without words, can be done in confusing and supposedly nonsensical way, in quotes. Boy, I'm still trying to process even my own prior romantic relationships, even years later. I can only imagine asking participants to reflect on their experience they had 20 minutes ago or 5 years ago. In my moments navigating, in my moments of brain fog, I might miss details. I might totally revision my experiences. In my moments of navigating anxiety crisis, I may not have the words to describe how I feel, what my embodied experience is like at the moment, but I might still want to be heard. In my days of hardcore depression, I might not have the energy to leave my bed or even brush my teeth or look presentable to the world, but I still might want and be willing to share how academia has taken a toll on how I feel about myself and how it has depleted my energy level. So narrative alchemy begins with an invitation to co-create. Participants, not just as informants, but as narrators, poets, artists of their own lived experience. They express their views, their perspectives, ways of being in the world through various means. A dot on a white piece of paper can express the ways in which I tend to minimize the value of my sexual capital as I navigate hookup apps. True story. In my own work, for example, through a series of collaborative sessions, we're collecting life stories using various mediums as chosen by the participants themselves, be it through spoken word, art, writing, or even body movement. So the method we use is adaptive. It's bending to the communicative preferences of participants. It's ensuring that the act of sharing is itself empowering and affirming. The alchemy occurs as these narratives are interwoven with scholarly analysis. Participants engage with their stories, reflecting on them, examining them through different lenses, often leading to new insights and even self-discoveries. This reflective process not only reaches the data, but also reinforces participants' sense of agency. Regarding impact, this kind of approach that I'm suggesting here has consistently produced that magical alchemy of transformation. This method reframes the interview, for example, as a space for dialogue and mutual reflection. Participants are encouraged to question, analyze their own responses, leading to deeper introspection and often a reclamation of their own narratives. Researchers, in turn, share our own reflections, blurring the line between researcher and subject, fostering a shared journey of understanding. The uplift and enfranchisement come as participants see their experiences validated and valued, often for the very first time. There's a shared ownership of the resulting narrative. It's a result of their intellect, their insights, as much as it is of the research process. This collaborative approach does not end with research, but extends into how findings are shared, with participants having a say in how their stories are told to the world. Such an approach can lead to participants feeling more enfranchised, with some even becoming advocates for changes in their own communities, using research as a platform to voice their needs and rights. In this way, the methodologies I employ are not static tools, but living practices that evolve with each practice, each research encounter, each relationship that I build. They're built on the principle that research, as at its most impactful, is a form of partnership, a shared act of creation that has the power to uplift, empower, and to transform, and even make me question my hookup strategies. So, coexisting realities. Crip Magic invites a profound re-examination of reality itself, challenging us to consider the multifaceted ways in which reality is perceived, remembered, and valued. This approach is particularly resonant in research involving participants with intellectual disabilities, where the presence of a companion during interviews can offer support and comfort, but also introduces some interesting complexity to the research process. In respecting the wishes of participants who request the presence of someone during interviews, I try to honor their need for a supportive environment. However, the setup also presents unique methodological considerations. For example, when a companion, be a family member, a caregiver, or support worker, they interject to supposedly correct the participant's, recollection of events. It highlights a very interesting tension between different perceptions of reality and truth. Such moments underscore the subjective nature of truth and memory, raising the question of whose version of reality is giving precedence in these interactions. Well, to give you the answer, I will always privilege reality to, participants themselves. Crip magic in this context becomes a methodological spell that seeks to balance these realities. It's about creating a space where all voices are heard, none are silenced, but it means actively listening to the participant, thinking about when to allow space for their stories to unfold, even if it differs from the companion's understanding of reality and truth. It's about valuing the coexistence of multiple truths, multiple realities, multiple ways of thinking about our own lived experiences as we understand them in the moment. It's about recognizing that each person's lived experience, regardless of disability and mental health, experience, provides a valuable lens through which to view the world. Mariah Carey is like my hero, so she's always part of my thinking through this as well. And I probably spend too much time going through GIFs for my slides than I should. I conduct consent as an interactive process. The information provided during consent should be comprehensive, accurate, and facilitate a genuine voluntary decision about participation. In my studies, interactions with participants occur multiple times before the actual interview or data collection. We want to offer ample opportunities to ask questions, consult trusted individuals in their lives. So adopting a participatory research approach is also crucial. For example, I encourage participants. The best way to describe through participants and having participants not just as participants but co-researchers, I'm able to understand what are the best questions we should be asking, how we should be asking those questions, but most importantly, how to jump out of the box, the limited arsenal of approaches that we have to doing qualitative research. In my research, I give special attention to making the details of the studies understandable to participants, ensuring they fully comprehend this information. For me, it's my job to do that. It's not the participant's job. In the past, I've, for example, developed simplified versions of consent forms to ensure clarity, using plain language, images, illustration, more creative ways of giving people information. I'm particularly attentive to the needs of prospective participants during the informed consent process. As Breckenroche and colleagues note, quote, relational sources of vulnerability encompasses not just participants' education level, health literacy, but also the suboptimal study designs, research, information, the lack of support we do or deliver to participants to make those decisions. Often in qualitative research, we simply focus on how people, should be able to understand research. But I think it's also important to note the job that is on our hands as researchers to make that research understandable. It's important for participants to have time to reflect on the study, ask questions, seek advice from their support network. Okay. I would like to share a poem here that I wrote, kind of similar in the theme that I will talk about, the notion of balancing risks and contribution. Please don't let protection silence me. Please don't justify exclusion for the sake of keeping me sheltered. Following the shadow of overprotection, my voice fades to a whisper. Lost in the echoes of caution, my story untold, unheeded. In your well-meaning shield, my agency is often forgotten. Under the guise of safety, my experiences remain hidden. Let not my madness be a reason to mute my narrative's power. For in my words lies strength, a perspective, in power. The world sees through a lens tinted with fear and misconception. But I ask you to listen, to understand my unique perception. In the quest to protect, let's not pave roads to isolation. For every silenced voice leads to a deeper segregation. Include me, engage me in research that tells my tale. Hear my lived experience beyond the protective veil. For in the richness of my story, there's wisdom to be found. So let's walk together in a balance that's just and fair, where protection and empowerment intersect with care. In this dance of understanding, let my voice ring true and free. Expanding on the concept that research involves both risks and contribution, it's crucial to delve deeper into the multifaceted nature of these aspects. Starting with the risks, participants may encounter challenges. One significant challenge or risk is the experience of emotional distress, which can be triggered by confronting sensitive topics, revisiting traumatic experiences throughout the research process. This distress is not just a momentary reaction. It can have prolonged effects, potentially requiring support for people that we work with. It's crucial to be proactive, have plans in place. For example, having resources in community that you can refer people to. But here's the caveat. Not simply resources you copy and paste from some random website about resources that you know, but really resources that you know, right, that do not are less likely to reinforce stigma and disempowerment. One that delivers strengths-based approach to serving people. It's also about asking participants if they need to support connecting with those connections and supports, allowing people to have the final say on this. It's about having a check-in phone call, especially for those who seem distressed and upset in our interactions. It's about true care. What I want to highlight here is the onus I place not on my participants, but on myself as a researcher. It's my job to ensure information about the study is understandable. It's my job to care about participants and to do my best that, at least to the best of my efforts, that they leave our space and time together feeling as good about themselves as possible. And if not, I want to be there to support them as much as possible to get into a better place. On the flip side, it's also equally important to recognize the potential benefits to individual research participants. We spend so much time talking about harms and risks, but what about the positive stuff? These benefits can be diverse, can be impactful. Firstly, participation in research can provide people with a sense of empowerment, validation, especially if the research focuses on issues so closely related to their own experiences and challenges. Being a part of a study that aims to address or shed light on these issues can be so empowering and validating to so many people. A lot of people that I've done interviews with in the community have told me right after the interview was over that this was the very first time they had someone who was non-judgmental here listen to their experiences that closely. Participants also experience so many other benefits, like a sense of accomplishment, a sense of self-esteem, contributing to the advancement of knowledge, the betterment of others in our similar situation. This can be so meaningful for those who have felt voiceless, marginalized, or alone. Finally, I think there is a very big benefit in contributing to societal understanding. Participants often find value in knowing that their contributions may help others in the future, may change what is happening out there in the world. To me, pays off in terms of the work I do. Participants may also, addressing the issue of stigma is a critical aspect of research as well, particularly in the context of mental health. Stigma, often fueled by unwarranted generalizations, assumptions, has the tendency to amplify this perceived, in quotes, deficits or vulnerabilities of people with mental health experiences. This skewed perception can lead to an exaggerated focus on their challenges while simultaneously overshadowing and underestimated our strengths, capability, and creativity. We're not just sitting around waiting to be saved. We're actually doing stuff and getting shit done. We're trying our best to thrive, survive, manage. We're providing mentorship to the younger generations of ourselves, sharing the goods that we learn along the way, the nuggets of experience and knowledge and wisdom that we have collected along the way. Now, just as participants place their trust in us as researchers, trusting us to handle their personal stories with care, respect their privacy, and use their contributions meaningfully, we as researchers need to reciprocate this trust. Trusting participants involves acknowledging and valuing their self-knowledge, recognizing the forms of wisdom and expertise they bring to the research. This trust is not merely about believing what they say, it's about respecting them as co-contributors to the knowledge creation process. Disabled people and mad people are so often discredited. I've heard things like, you don't know what you want. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you really need. And the least of these empowering statements go on and on and on. The misconceptions too must be challenged. I was also once told by an ethics review board that I should be careful because participants might become aggressive during interviews. Other researchers I know have been similarly warned about the danger, in quotes, of engaging with disabled and mad people in the community. I was also told that my participant might misunderstand our interview context and that would land into trouble. In the same breath, we're being told that disabled and mad people are just too vulnerable to participate in research. This reminds me of Patricia Hill Collins and the notion of controlling images. Rather than being allowed to live in lives of complexity, some groups are placed in the extremes. Either you're a vulnerable person or a danger to each other or to others. There's no in between. However, either way, we see calls for protection or containment or forms of silencing taking place. Or as one participant also told me, a young man with an intellectual disability, no matter where you end up on those extremes, you're screwed, and not in a good way. Oh, the exhausting labor of reasserting the humanity of mad and disabled people. The painful act of having to say again and again, calm down, people. We can trust disabled and mad people, at least as much as what one would trust anyone out in the community. I've also for sure taken higher risks going to late at night hookups with men I had just met in apps. As a researcher and as an individual, I take thought out risks. I think about them. We navigate these risks with the ability as much as we can. Expanding in this notion, it's important to understand that individuals with mental illness or mental health experiences often develop unique insights, coping strategies, resilience that can provide invaluable contributions to research. These lived experiences can offer a richer, more nuanced understanding in terms of mental health, challenging prevailing stereotypes, contributing to a more effective, empathetic approach in how we provide care and do policy. Therefore, combating stigma, building a foundation of mutual trust is not just an ethical imperative, it's a methodological necessity. It enriches the research process, yields more accurate, comprehensive findings, and ultimately contributes to a more just and empathetic understanding of mental health. Okay, this is my favorite GIF. I love Mariah Carey serving diva energy. As a mad researcher, my understanding of success extends beyond the confines of traditional academic metrics like publications and citations. In a field where lived experiences intersect intricately with academic inquiry, the true measure of success lies in a more nuanced and socially impactful outcomes. That to me matters more, or the relationships I built along the way. One of the key indicators of success is the opportunity to effect positive changes in community perceptions. This involves challenging, reshaping societal narratives around mental health and disability, presenting research that is rooted in the lived experiences of Med individuals. The aim is to break down stereotypes, misconceptions. Another piece that is so essential to me is the empowerment of participants. In traditional research settings, participants are sometimes viewed as subjects from whom data is extracted. However, in my approach, success is understood as how well the research empowered people involved in it. This means providing people with a platform to voice their experiences, concerns, involving people actively in the research process, ensuring that their participation and involvement has a meaningful impact in their lives and in their communities, where participants feel valued, heard, see the benefits of their involvement, and that is a significant marker of success. Additionally, the promotion of mental health justice stands as a vital measure of success. This encompasses advocating for equitable access to mental health resources, challenging discriminatory practices, working towards policy changes that recognize, address the needs of Med individuals, is from the perspectives of Med individuals. Success in this area is often a longer-term goal, requiring sustained efforts, collaboration with various stakeholders. It's measured not just in terms of immediate outcomes, but also in gradual shifts in policy, practice. It's about challenging the ways we traditionally do things. As a disability studies scholar, the role of mentorship within academia has also brought profound and sometimes conflict set of emotions for me. It's a space where I grapple with a delicate balance of guiding aspiring scholars and students while remaining deeply aware of the pitfalls that lurk in the shadows. The heart of this dissonance lies in my fear of reproducing, perpetuating unrealistic, problematic expectations of productivity and success within this academic space. But at the same time, nurturing the potential of my students to become strong candidates for graduate schools, tenure track positions. I grapple with these concerns daily. I find myself caught between nurturing the aspirations of my students while ensuring that they don't get entangled in this web of unrelenting expectations that have led to burnout, compromised mental health for so many of us in this academic space. To navigate this dissonance, I've also made it to a point to engage in open and candid conversations with my mentees. I encourage them to define success on their own terms, not exclusively within the traditional confines of academia. To make it a bit more concrete for you, let me just give you some examples. For example, having flexibility in expectations, recognizing that disabled students may need more time, more flexibility in our expectations, our timelines. We need to be open to doing this, accommodating needs regarding deadlines, research schedules, workloads, keeping open communication, creating an environment where open, honest communication is encouraged, letting students feel comfortable discussing their experiences with disability, with madness, their needs, their concerns without fear of judgment or stigma. It's about staying attuned to the mental health and well-being of our mentees, recognizing signs of distress, of stress, burnout, providing guidance, providing support. This can be done in very subtle ways. For example, every 2 weeks or so, I try to do check-ins with some of my students using fun titles, like, how do you feel this week? Do you feel like glamorous Mariah Carey? Or do you feel kind of like, yeah, Beyonce, like not her best day? But most importantly, it's about promoting the creation of mentorship communities for disabled and med students, including faculty members, but also allowing for peer support, peer knowledge to be shared in this approach. My job is to use all the resources I have, all the things I have access to help support students take a leading role in creating those spaces themselves even. Let me end with one final poem. So I'd like to conclude this presentation by sharing this poem I wrote. This was inspired by the realization that many of the students who I work with are also queer, also disabled, also mad. It's like we're magnets seeking each other in the dark and trying to the best of our ability to create alternative spaces that allow for more spaces for kindness, flexibility, acceptance, a space for belonging, in a space that sometimes tells us we do not belong. Like magnets, we're drawn. In unity, we find our dawn. Together, we forge a bond that gleams, attracting each other in life streams. The magic of being Crip, mad, and queer. In our circle, these labels endear. In each other, we find a reflection, a community built on shared connection. We create a world, a parallel yet true, where time halts, granting a view of a space where tired minds matter, where voices rise above the clatter. In this realm, our spirits dance free, unbound for society's decree. Here, every heartbeat writes a story, bathed in its own unique glory. Our laughter, a melody of resilience, echoing through the silence. In our world, every tear and smile is a testament to miles we've traveled in style. Together, we redefine the norm. In our storm, we find our warmth. In the chaos, we find our peace. In our madness, our true release. In this community, we're never alone, for each other's battles are our own. In our unity, we find our strength. In our diversity, our length. So here, let's stand together and proud, our heads held high, our voices loud. For in this world that we've made, our colors never fade. This is our parallel reality, a haven of love, a sanctuary of vitality, where being Crip, mad, and queer is a reasoning to cheer, not to fear. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Ellen. That was marvelous. There's so much to digest and unpack in there, and just so appreciating the care that you evidence in your work and in your enthusiasm for the work that you're doing, and as you put it, reasserting the humanity of mad and disabled people. Folks, please feel free to use the chat to put your comments and questions, or unmute your camera, or use your raise hand symbol to indicate an interest in um, asking a question of Alan or engaging in dialogue. And Alan, I don't know if you can see the chat in real time. I'm happy to convey questions as well, but there's a lot of notes of appreciation and gratitude and so forth in the chat that I hope you have a chance to see, but they're pouring in. Alan, maybe while we're waiting for people to queue up the courage to to unmute and ask a question, I was so intrigued by your use of poetry. It's such a powerful modality, and one that we don't often see in qualitative research, although I think there's more space for it now than there used to be. But could you say a little bit more about your how you came upon this as a modality that really spoke to you, how you articulate or understand that interface between research and poetry, because it's more than just a way of conveying. There's something else there. I'd love to hear you on that. And the questions are starting to come in, so I'll.
Mhm. Yeah, there's something really magical, I think, about thinking about ways of communicating how we feel, our ideas, our experiences, but also as a tool for reflection. For me, being able to, there are ways, things that I just cannot articulate in written words, for example. So poetry is one of the ways I communicate, but I've certainly had moments that I would just get a piece of paper and cut it in particular ways and have that sensation, the feeling, the that movement not only kept me awake, during some difficult moments of thinking of ideas, but it just allowed it to make it an embodied experience. For me, qualitative research is an embodied experience. And the feedback that I've always heard from participants in arts-based approaches that I followed it was exactly that. I was able to be in that space in a way that I never felt before. That already, to me, was such a big reward. But the ability also to be able to just communicate, expand reality, how we see it, how we express it, that has been so powerful, I think. And even in my own teaching, I try to take that, right? In my med studies course, for example, I've asked students to create comic books, comic strips, or use poetry, using sculpture. Is pushing students to really have a much broader toolbox of ways of expressing, engaging with others, and building connection.
Thank you. That's beautiful. There's so much to explore there. Yanni has her hand up. Yanni, go ahead.
Hi, Ellen. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for a lovely presentation. Um, there's so many directions I could go with the questions, but I thought the one that I'm often thinking about being in rehabilitation sciences and working in research for people labeled with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm also very interested in disability studies and critical disability studies. And I know a number of us are always having this conversation. Can disability studies and health sciences and different ways they conceptualize disability, some would say they're foes and some would say they're friends or somewhere in between. And I'm just wondering maybe some comments about sort of where you are as far as sort of integrating or approaching conceptualizations of disability when you're working as I am, and I think you are too, like in either community health, public health, rehab sciences, where often it's about fixing, repairing, or preventing disability are the discourses, versus disability studies, which comes from a very different perspective and often don't want to speak to people who are doing research more from the health science perspective. So it's more a comment, but just like to have a conversation about how you approach that in your work.
But no, that's a fantastic point, and I appreciate that we do navigate kind of similar spaces, right? I am in a school of medicine, which I never thought I would end up in, and it has been interesting in many ways. I think it has created more opportunities to bring a more critical perspective in terms of madness and disability to folks that never had contact with it before. So in some ways, I think it puts me in a strategic position where I can expand people's ideas of how we can understand disability in the first place. So it has led to some really what I would call strategic partnerships as well. Having an opportunity to work with OBGYNs, for example, in projects, right, about the intellectual disability, that has created an opportunity to engage people who are providing very direct care to people in the community that never thought about disability studies before. By these collaborations, it's really an opportunity to educate others, push the envelope. I'm learning from their world too. Like, how can we be more strategic in terms of reaching those folks that are not listening to us or listening or hearing about us? So to me, I like to see it as position of strategy, right? Where we can push the envelope, add more vocabulary to people's work. Like, it's amazing how sometimes colleagues who never heard the term intersectionality, I mean, and this is a whole new term for some people. I mean, or thinking that intersectionality is not just determinants of health. It's actually a social justice issue. We're talking about inequality here. Like, it's okay to use the word inequality as well. So that to me has been such a unique opportunity that perhaps if I was in a department where we kind of share the same language, you wouldn't be the same impact, right? So I hope that we are using our strategic position, being outside of the typical place where we are, to change some minds and change the ways that people do research, right? And create some change in that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel the same way, but sometimes it can be lonely when you're working in a very kind of more medicalized setting. And so you feel alone. So it'll be nice to continue a conversation with you because it's nice to have a peer support outside of academia. And the other thing I would say is also, when it comes to addressing research ethics and being concerned about the vulnerability of the population risk, there's also like kind of pushing back, well, what is the risk of not having people with lived experience participate in research, right? There's a lot of ethical risk there too. So just a comment there, and I'll let you answer some other
And
questions.
potential harms, right? Like are
Yes,
reproduced
exactly.
by not engaging with this
Exactly.
set of lived experiences. Oh, absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
it on one hand, again, like it's that strategic position. Like I try to use these opportunities and conversations with ethics review boards to challenge their ideas about disability too.
Yeah,
The challenge is that these
absolutely.
boards are always changing sometimes, right? Because it's volunteer work. So it's
Mhm.
a lot of educating, re-educating, reminding people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yanni. Janet has her hand up. Go ahead, Janet.
Hello, Yanni, and for your questions, they were fantastic. Alan, thank you for this amazing presentation. Um, I I have one specific question, but let me just elaborate a little bit more, just to complicate what you were saying, that sometimes, doing work within the medical field or medical education environment
Mhm.
is a little bit different. You have to partner and be strategic. Well, I am partnering the Faculty of Medicine in University of Toronto in my identity and my capacity as a patient partner, as an
Mhm.
educator. So we're
Mhm.
trying, for the last 2 years, we've been embedding concepts of ableism, disability inclusion, not just the legislative medical part of it, but actually what is
Mhm.
the impact to say to a mother that just had a Down syndrome baby, I'm so sorry for you, when in fact it's a celebration. There's a
Mhm.
baby, right?
Mhm.
So all of these perceptions about
Yeah.
disability as a deficit. So I really appreciate when you said we have to celebrate who we are and how we live, think, and do our lives. So the question, and this is being mostly, again, as in my capacity, usually I navigate places where I'm not powerful and decision maker. Um,
Mhm.
you talked about empowerment and to empower, and I've been trying to distance myself with that word because it felt like I'm passively waiting for someone who has the
Mhm.
power to give it to me. And I get,
Mhm.
I don't know, allergies.
Mhm.
I've been using reclaiming agency. So, I mean, I would appreciate your comments. Hi, Jen.
No, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Like, it's amazing. I witnessed in the past sometimes folks approaching disability from a deficit lens and like bringing the lens of celebration and positive and cripping. I think of this understanding is so important. So thank you. Yes, no, I mean, this notion of empowerment is such a tricky one, right? I think the way I usually talk about this is really through the lens of partnership, much more walking alongside or working with, right? Um, what I appreciate is that the work that I do is so community engaged or so community informed, right? So all the research projects that I do as part of the lab comes from funny requests that I will get from community, right? So one of my favorites was two parents who are like, my son is using the eggplant emoji on the app, and I don't know what that is. So it's like, okay, let's develop some like tools where we talk about what the emojis mean, right? And make it like non-judgmental, use language that is positive. To me, that is one opportunity to make it so we're not empowering people per se. We're much more working with. We're listening to community, keeping our ears on the ground, having a sense of what the needs and research questions really are. And then I'm just mobilizing my resources, right? Like as someone who is connected to a university, I do have some funding, access to libraries and things. My job is to use all the resources I can to support the questions that the community is bringing, right? So for me, that makes it much more of a two-way street, or maybe a one-way, one street that we're all partying together in the middle of it. It's hard to kind of make it concrete, the image, but I hope that the language of partnership, one that thinks about power relations for sure, who thinks about different access to resources, one that is about honest communication, right? Genuine care. Those are the values that I've tried to bring in my community engaged work.
Thank you, Janet, for your question and comment, and thank you, Alan, as well. It's one of the things I really appreciated about your talk today is these terms, partnership and so on, are thrown around so loosely sometimes, and you are so wonderfully generous and specific with us about exactly what that looks like in your work. And that's so important. I put in the chat at one point there about really paying attention to the kind of relational accountability and the values that drive that as distinct from the very transactional performative way in
Mhm.
which consent and other aspects of participation are often handled. So thank you. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people drew a lot from that.
And if I could just say very briefly, like sometimes it is hard to do this, this work, just the ways that universities are set up, right? For example, one of the biggest challenges I faced in the past was I talk to folks in the community who often talk about social isolation as one of their biggest challenges. We spend an hour and a half, 2 hours talking about how social isolation, isolated they feel. Then as soon as I turn off the tape recorder, they're like, oh my God, this is the first time I felt heard and I felt the connection. And then they generally want to keep that connection going. They want that relationship to not end as the interview ends, right? But we have those expectations sometimes around what counts as a partnership or like a relationship with people participating in research and how there's a conclusion, there's an end date, right? But most of the time, like the folks that I engage with and work with alongside with, these are folks that I'm also encountering in the community. We're advocating things together. We're not just seeing each other in that context, right? So that is one of the biggest struggles I face in terms of that relationship building, right? It feels very odd to me sometimes when someone just discloses social isolation and I'm like, okay, bye, see you. I'll let you know when we have results. Like it's not the way I would like to do research, right? And I do try to find my ways around it, in recognizing that relationships are not just that interaction. It means much more than that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me, and that's one of many examples where a deeply relational approach seems to rub up against a very neoliberal, transactional kind of university context that for whom all kinds of red flags get raised when we talk about continuing relationship beyond the formal interview, etc. Yeah,
Mhm.
we have Denise. Denise, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Well, thank you, Alan. It was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it. You started answering my question as was about to ask it. I face the same problem as you do.
Mhm.
When I work with immigrants and they say they are socially isolated, they recently arrived in Canada, I cannot get rid of them because I collected the data. That doesn't exist. But in the corporate
Mhm.
university, where productivity is mainly what matters, and people are a source of data, therefore we are data extractors,
Mhm.
miners, like mining data, right? These are common ideas. When I say to colleagues, I don't want to get involved in projects where there is extractivism, they think I work in the mining industry, right? So when I faced that, I immediately related to what you were saying. And so can you share with us few of the strategies? Because there is a community building element that
Mhm.
is connected to your idea of empowerment. So in this community building, uh, how do you then go about finishing a project and getting into the next project? And how do you carry? Because I know what I've been doing, and the more projects I have had, the more relationships and networks I have to
Mhm.
maintain and stay in touch. Also because I want to be in these relationships.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I tell my colleagues it's like a partnership, like being married to people, because
Mhm.
these things don't go away. So it puts you in a very particular place in this productivist university. So can you share strategies with us?
Yeah, oh, you just read my mind in so many ways. So thank you for sharing your experiences as well, right? It's funny because I've talked about these relationships as well. Like the effort, the work, the investment that goes into it. It's not just like a project ends, that's it. But it's really taking the time to actually have coffee with people, like multiple times. And even after the project is done, I'm still grabbing coffee with like partner organizations, for example, and having a sense of where they are. it almost like a marriage. We also hope that it has like honesty in the communication, right? Sometimes, for example, organizations and and providers and people with lived experience, for example, they're so overtaxed, and overworked or so busy. But what I appreciate is that in our relationship, we feel we have a space for honesty where someone can say, you know what, I just don't have the energy for this. Like I would pass on this one. Or like this doesn't make sense to me to participate. Like to me, that honesty, it's already one sign, right? That relationship is one, I hope, a meaningful one, right? That to me is what I appreciate for sure. That honesty, that openness. Um, so to me, it's really about keeping those relationships open, asking people what they need much more than what I want. I think that's also very magical. The number of service providers and people with lived experience who are so appreciative of that approach, where I'm not just coming in, right, with a research question and just coming and just getting data and leaving. No, I think what I like the most about this kind of community engaged or community-based research and scholarship is like, no, let's think about what are the issues that we're facing here as a community, and let's work together in every step of the way. Now, one caveat, Denise, that I find very interesting has been the challenge I faced with publishing with self-advocates, with people with lived experience, journals that have pushed back and said that they're not contributing enough to research and thus they should not be noted as authors, even though they participated in the actual like analysis, like we wrote it together, whether it was phone calls and we're talking to each other. So I mean, there is an issue here still about, right? Like again, this notion that we're just getting data and I'm the expert and I will write about it. So we absolutely need to change those things. We need to push back at this, ways of writing, who's seen as a contributor and what counts as contribution in terms of productivity too, right? Like, I mean, I will always take my time and do things right or at what I feel is right. I'm not gonna rush organizations. I'm not gonna add more to their plate when it shouldn't be. So I think it definitely involves a lot of pushing back and challenging that I'm sure not all of us are even in a position to do so, right? And I definitely recognize that even. I'm now, honestly, I'm in the mode of like, take it or leave it, like I mentioned in the presentation, because these are things that are non-negotiable for me as a scholar and as someone with lived experience, as someone who's part of these communities that I'm working with. Like, this is non-negotiable. I'm not doing the data mining here. Yeah.
Sweet, thank you. Jen, go ahead.
Oh, wow. I feel like there's water in the desert here today. Alan, thank you so much for everything. I want to, first of all, check in with you and just, how are you doing? You're taking your first sip of water and bring some of that Crip magic to this process, right? Like how we do seminars. So I hope you're taking a pause and maybe I want to share an observation and then ask a follow-up question. And hi, Janet. I'm happy to see you again too. So the observation is, and this is a deep learning for me today, is that, you know, in the neoliberal colonial institutions, everything is siloed, including how we do so-called research, right? There's the theory part and the lit review part, and then there's the methodology part. And CQ, with all my love, is very much siloed, unfortunately, and institutionally into the methodology part. But the deep learning for me today is when we're cripping and maddening and we're making human, right, everything to do with inquiry, then it is everything is connected, right? You have to take down those silos. And the learning here is about the micro magicking, right? Which may live in theory, the micro magicking, which may live in um, the first email to someone who's going to share their story with you. Um, it's so much greater than methodology, and yet it has to be also threaded through methodology. So, yeah, that's the huge learning for me. And You know, if I was new to this, I would be like, I could do that micro magicking right there. Or depending on capacity and space and connection and who's got my back, literally, then I could do some macro magicking, right? Oh, that feels profound. So thank you. And then the question, and you touched on this a little bit with one of your amazing visuals, is time. And I want to ask you to talk about, you know, in this confluence of all of these things connected together and the magicking and the alchemy, if you can talk to us a little bit about cripping and maddening time in and through this methodology. Thanks.
No, thank you so much for, mentioning that the blurring the lines, I think, right? When we're asked often to separate and create those, I really appreciate that. Cripping time is something that is so interesting for me. And I've been putting a lot of thought into how I do it in a micro level and a macro level in some ways. I think in the macro level, for example, it has been a lot about pushing back against expectations from institutions, from programs, from funders, trying my best to do that in some ways successfully, right? For example, I was working on a grant for CIHR with a community partner, and I just thought it would be absurd to push them like with a timeline that just didn't make sense to them. Like they're not operating with a university timeline, and that's how it should be, right? And I was actually, a miracle happened, and I got an extension from CIHR for a grant, right? Because they understood that the organization, it does not make sense to impose my timeline on them. And if we want to do this meaningfully, like this is an application that is saying that it's community, based, like, and we're doing this partnership. It does not make sense to start in this way where I'm just gonna write everything and just pretend that the organization is in, right? That's not true partnership. So to me, that was a big, big win in terms of pushing back, right? But I also do it in more subtle ways. For example, I always like to put my automatic response in my email, like using Mariah Carey themed. And it's always about pushing back against notions of productivity, allowing myself to be human, allowing myself to say, you know what, I'm gonna take the week off. I'm out, and nothing's that urgent. It sends a message to people who receive it. So it's not just for myself, but it's also a message to my students about it's okay to not talk to me and to take your time as much as you can. It's messages that we send, right? Like, and it can be something as simple as email reply or you pushing back against CIHR or SHIRK, right? Even with SHIRK, I was in the accessibility committee for their policies, and of course, it was an opportunity for me to kind of, again, see, are there ways we can push back against this structure of thinking about research, about calling for the community engaged and community-based research without actually walking the walk? How do we push back in a more systematic way here? So it's kind of like it's an octopus. I see myself as an octopus with multiple arms around different things and trying to create micro and macro changes at the same time. The last thing I'll say too is like, even with my students, there have been many, many occasions where the students have not been granted that kindness that was temporarily given during the pandemic. Now it's just gone, right? We're told constantly by the university that we should be kind, understanding to students during the pandemic. We should be flexible. And yet now we are no longer hearing those things anymore. It's like nothing happened. But I'm trying to keep some of that spirit in the sense that I'm creating my own timelines with students sometimes. It's almost like we have an alternative, parallel universe where we're like, you know what, screw these timelines. We're gonna come up with our own that makes sense to us here. I had so many conversations with students who are like drinking Coke and tea and coffee at the same time. And I'm looking at my table, I'm the same way. In our conversations, in our nice encounters of saying, oh my God, we're both doing this, it just opened that space again of kindness and understanding and creating opportunities for mentorship, challenging time and expectations of productivity. And yeah, like, so I see this as a multifaceted way of doing it.
Thank you so much, Alan. Really appreciate that. Anyone else?
Such a rich discussion. I'm really struck listening to you, Alan, also about the work of pushing back and the toll that that takes, and the pushing back not only against funders and REB, but also the bigger project that I imagine you're engaged in of pushing back around curricular reform, like how we teach research methods in our universities, and how we prepare the next generation of public health scholars, researchers, activists, etc. And
Mhm.
I imagine many come to you just through sheer inspiration and hearsay and wanting to learn from you. But there's a whole other group that that also needs to be reached, and I'm guessing you're involved in some of that as well. But I also want to acknowledge, just because we have another project looking at curricular reform for public health and the Anthropocene, very different topic, but the what we're hearing from people in terms of their experiences of being dismissed, ghosted, minimized, etc., by the institution, or lip service, great idea, but then nothing really changes. There's significant work and toll associated with that work. I wonder if you'd like to speak to any of that.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point as well. Um, I take my job as like training the next generation of qualitative scholars very so seriously, right? As well. It's such a gift when you get a student who never done research before, and now this is their first try. One of the things that I was talking to one of my students recently about was that she never realized how much pushback she would face doing research with folks with disabilities, for example. She never realized how every time she talked about it, it would be treated as such a taboo topic, or so much resistance to it, or how she was shocked how many times she had to write multiple paragraphs, even saying, what is nothing about us without us, and why does it matter? Right? The labor that my students are already taking on, even to prove that this work matters and that their ways of doing research matters, is so interesting. The number of graduate students that I've also seen who are on tight budgets, on time constraints, who were really discouraged for engaging with people with lived experience because supposedly it's too complex or too time consuming. Or, even myself, I remember I was completely discouraged from engaging with people with lived experience because it was like, just save it for your master's, save it for your PhD, save it for your postdoc. It's like this constant postponing that you should, and for some students, unfortunately, I've seen cases of students where doing projects that is not what they wanted to do, or not engaging with people with lived experience because of this fear, this discouragement that happens. And I find that it's such a missed opportunity in some ways, right? This postponing. So I think we need to change a little bit also, like, how can we support students do this important work that they want to do in the way that I think it opens opportunities for voices that we're not listening to in the first place? How do we support students in pushing back as well, right? Like, as a faculty member, like, I'm constantly jumping in, right? And being like, no, I got your back as my student, and I will help you come up with a way of conceptualizing, explaining this to people who need to understand why this work matters. Right? But I mean, again, it's really interesting to see my undergraduate students, especially, like, already navigating some of these questions and thinking about the challenges of doing qualitative research sometimes and being recognized as important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think mentoring junior colleagues too, because that postponement continues into our tenure stream positions where,
Mhm.
we're expected to have a certain level of performativity to get tenure. And so the message is, well, do that after you get tenure. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And to me, like, again, like, what counts success to us, right? As researchers, like, publications are fun. I still get like, definitely excited when they come out. But I think the best part is when you have those conversations over coffee with people. It's those, moments where people are like, oh my God, we used your paper, or we talked about your project, and that helps us start something in our organization. Or this led to this. Like, that to me, no matter how big or small, like, that to me is a reward. That to me is the important. The relationship itself is a reward, because people, outside of this, sphere that we are here, it's very easy to take for granted that, how it's not an easy thing to build these relationships and to get the trust of people as well, right? So every time I feel like in that position, the way I feel now here in Calgary, I just feel it's magic. It's part of that magic.
Yeah, thank you. I love how you've been using the word magic here. It's like so central to your message. Listen, we're pretty much at time. I really want to thank you, Alan, for an amazing and thought-provoking and challenging talk. Jen, for your contributions and introduction. Tenzin for uh, moving us along in so many ways here, and all of you for participating and contributing through the chat and the side conversations and the resources that were shared on the chat. There's a lot been happening there, community building and sharing as well. So that's really been lovely. It's been a privilege to be part of this today. And I hope you all go forth into your day enlivened by what we've heard and has been shared here today. Thank you so much. And please don't forget, we have another talk coming up on April 26th by Dr. Merit Solbjar. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And the title is on hegemonic masculinity in focus groups in men's health. So please join us for that next seminar in the CQ series if you are able. And again, thank you all for your participation today.
Thanks, everyone.